And I think we have about 1 more minute until we start.
Okay.
Howdy, everyone. It is 2:30, so we are going to begin. Thank you all for coming to our microaggressions presentation. And then, Amanda, do you want to go to the next slide?
Okay.
Yeah.
Howdy, my name is Amanda, and I'm a junior chemical engineer from Plano, Texas, and I am the SWE representative.
And howdy, my name is Tatiana Webb. I'm no longer an engineering student, but I was in chemical engineering. This semester I changed to food science and technology. So still STEM, but not an engineer anymore. But I am the corporate vice president for SWE.
So today we will be talking to you guys about microaggressions. So here's a brief rundown of everything we'll be going over in today's presentation. So first we'll be identifying what microaggressions are. Then we'll be moving on to how they affect people around you and how to respond to people that do microaggressive actions. So first, what are microaggressions and how to identify them? So a microaggression is the everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias toward historically marginalized groups. So this term was first proposed by psychiatrist Dr. Chester Pierce in the 1970s, and he used it to describe insults and dismissals witnessed non-Black Americans inflicting on African Americans. So what makes microaggressions different from normal insults? So microaggressions are remarks, questions, or actions that are painful because they have to do with a person's membership in a group that's discriminated against or subject to stereotypes. And they often appear to be a compliment or a joke, but contain a hidden insult about a group of people. So next, we'll be talking about the types of microaggressions. So the first type of microaggression are microassaults, and these are conscious and intentional actions or slurs. And an example of a microassault is referring someone as colored or oriental, and discouraging interracial interactions, and deliberately serving a white patron before someone of color. The next type of microaggression are microinsults. So these are verbal and nonverbal communications that subtly convey rudeness and insensitivity and demean a person's racial heritage or identity. So an example of a microinsult is when an employee of color is asked, how did you get your job? So the underlying message from the perspective of that person is one, people of color are not qualified, or two, as a minority group member, you must have obtained the position through some affirmative action or quota program and not because of ability. And a nonverbal example of a micro insult is like when a white teacher fails to acknowledge students of color in the classroom. So the next type of microaggression are microinvalidations. So these are communications that exclude, negate, nullify people's thoughts, feelings, or expressions. So if you tell a person of color, we are all human beings, you're denying the significance of their racial/ethnic experience and history. So the first step in addressing microaggressions is to recognize when a microaggression has occurred and what message it may be sending. So the context of the relationship and situation is critical when identifying them as well. So here are a few common microaggression themes. So the first theme is gender. So an example of this is, you're a girl, you don't have to be good at math. So that sends the message that women should play the role of housewife slash caretaker of the family, and women are less capable in math and science. The next theme is race. So if you ask someone like, where are you from, where were you born, you speak English very well, specifically to like a person of color, it comes across, the message that comes across is like, you're not a true American or you're a foreigner. So the next theme is age. So an example of this is, I was expecting someone a little younger. Surfing can be really hard on the body. And so this is basically saying, since you're older, you're incapable of certain activities. And the next theme is sexual orientation. So a statement could be, I like you, but why do others have to shove it in your face? And so this says that the LGBTQ plus experience is abnormal and offensive. So the next theme is disabilities. So if you help a disabled person onto a train without asking, that sends a message that they're incapable of being independent. And the last theme that we'll go over is class. So if you say that's ghetto to someone, that sends the message that like being poor is associated with negative characteristics. So we took a poll from our general SWE members and asked them if they've like ever experienced microaggressions. And here are a few quotes that were said. So the first one is, it must be easier for you to get an internship or into engineering since you're a woman. The next one is, you shouldn't wear bright colors or dresses to work so you don't look too feminine. And the next one is, you don't look like an engineer. And the last one is, you sure you want to be an engineer? It is super hard. So moving on, have any of you guys experienced microaggressions? Feel free to drop in the chat or come off mute with a microaggressive comment or action you've encountered.
And I'll share a time. So one of those quotes in the last screen was actually mine. In high school, when I first started talking about going into engineering, I definitely got a lot of strange looks, and a couple of people were like, are you sure you want to do that? It's a really hard major. And I was like, of course I want to do it. Like I love math, I love science. Why wouldn't I be able to do it? They're like, I don't know, it's just super hard. And it made me feel less than I was. Like they were trying to make me feel less than I was and not as confident in who I am and my abilities. And I'm not sure if that was the message they were trying to convey to me, or just that like, you're gonna have to work really hard at it. But that is how I perceived it.
Yeah, I can share. Oh, was someone?
Sorry, I was going to say, I have an example.
Okay.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, I'm one of the project managers for AggieSat 7, or I am the project manager for AggieSat 7 at the moment. And we were having onboarding for the new members a few weeks ago. And they have like a 4-hour project that they're supposed to do during it. And as a project manager, one of my jobs is to go around and ask people if they need help. And one of the groups was a group of all 4 males. So I got into the room and I asked them if they needed any help. And all of them just went quiet and like looked at me for a minute. And then they were like, no, I think we're fine. And then like 30 seconds later, my male counterpart entered, who's the AggieSat 6 project manager. And they asked him questions apparently. So I was like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
That's so unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very awkward. I was like, okay.
I'm really sorry you experienced that. I'm on AggieSat 6 as a team lead. I would hate to see that about AggieSat 6. I haven't necessarily experienced any of that, but I hate to see it.
Yeah, it was, I don't know. I think 1 or 2 of them might be on my team now. I'm not 100% sure, but it was very
awkward. And I haven't had any issues with the people that are on the team now since, but yeah, the first go around, it was a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm sorry that happened to you. And during our next slide, we'll start to talk about the effects that microaggressions do have on people. Amanda, if you want to.
Yeah.
So the next part is we're going to talk a little bit about why understanding microaggressions are so important. And a great analogy is paper cuts. So one small microaggression might feel like a little paper cut, but eventually they add up over time and they'll feel very painful. And they almost make it feel like the next quote you'll see on the slides, which is death by 1,000 cuts, which used to be a Chinese form of torture and execution. That's the word. And it almost feels like when you keep getting these little microaggressions, it almost feels like a torture on the person because you start to question yourself and your worth. So results of microaggressions are serious effects on mental health. You can see it with the labeling theory, imposter syndrome, and achievement gap. So a little bit more about the imposter syndrome. It was termed in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Rosecrans and Suzanne Imes, and it refers to the feelings of inadequacy despite evident success. So how does the imposter syndrome affect the workplace? Well, it can affect the workplace in several ways. It can create a feeling of exclusion and self-doubt in a person that is constantly perceived as getting microaggressed. So according to a survey done by Working Mother Media, half of women of color plan to leave their jobs in the next 2 years, citing feeling marginalized or disillusionments. And those were caused by microaggressions from their counterparts, causing a lot of self-doubt within themselves. And then the next is the labeling theory. And usually this is in part with crime science, but you can also see it with microaggressions because people will start to identify themselves and behave the ways that reflect how others label them. So if you have a job interview and a person of color is being interviewed and the interview makes a comment to them, they're going to start to feel, makes a comment about criminalization, deviancy, anything of that sort. It's going to make them feel like they're being labeled as a criminal or a deviant, and it pushes them a little bit closer to, well, if I'm already that person, why not be that anyways? And it's something that you have to really work on. You don't want to push anybody into a situation that they feel uncomfortable or like they are not being them true selves. And then for the achievement gap, so on the slide, you can obviously see there's a pay gap between females and males in engineering. And this was from 2016. It's on the National SWE website. But microaggressions cause an achievement gap, partly because of the imposter syndrome, with people feeling inadequate and self-doubting themselves and getting excluded in a workplace and feeling like they don't deserve as much as their counterparts. And this achievement gap with the pay is just a quick show that this is a thing that happens in everyday workplaces. And then along with the imposter syndrome, labeling theory, and achievement gap, there's a lot of mental health that comes with microaggressions. It can cause a lot of anxiety, depression, sleep difficulties, diminished confidence, helplessness, loss of drive, intrusive cognitions, which is that internal dilemma, like, am I really where I belong, and diminished cognition. And none of those are great. I know that as engineers, I'm sure a lot of people feel a lot of anxiety and sleep difficulties when it comes to homework and everything. So I feel like you can relate to that. And we don't want to cause more of that through microaggressions. And so I know a couple of people have shared about experience they've had with microaggressions. And you guys can either talk in the chat or off mute, but about how that made you feel, uncomfortability wise, a little bit disgust or belittlement, just quick poll on seeing how people feel after a microaggression has been made. So I will talk about how microaggression has made me feel. I know I've been a server for a long time, and I always get the comment, "You're prettier when you smile," from men. And it makes me feel a little disgusted, to be honest with you, and uncomfortable, because
And now number one, I don't want to smile in front of you because you've now made that comment to me, and I don't want to just listen to whatever you have to say. But also, it makes me feel like I'm not as pretty when I'm not smiling, and it's not a great feeling.
Yeah, I can talk about a time I had a microaggression against me. So I was at a company informational and I was the only person of color in the room. And one of the recruiters asked if I was a US citizen or not. And I just like felt very ostracized and really awkward because I was the only person of color in the room. So yeah.
And so in the next part, we're going to be talking a little bit about great ways to respond to microaggressions and how to avoid being a microaggressor. So first off, we want to talk about how to respond to a microaggression productively. You should always start with taking a deep breath. I mean, if you take a deep breath right now, there's an instant calm, like you're not in this sea alone. You're able to gather your thoughts for just a second. And assume that offense was not the intent, because if you do, you're going to end up causing more hurt to yourself than needs to be. And if you can always feel free to ask follow-up questions like, who are you referring to when you say that? And what do you mean? And explain to them how the slight might be interpreted by others. And then also going, and if you don't feel comfortable with doing any of that, you can find individuals that you feel comfortable with discussing this with, whether that is friends and family, cohort members, or mentors. And then if a microaggressor denies an act of microaggression, you need to ask yourself, will further conversation be beneficial and productive? Because if it's not going to be beneficial to you and them, there's no point in continuing the conversation. It's going to end up causing you more stress in the end. And then what is your current stress level, and am I able to respond non-emotionally? Because being able to respond non-emotionally will allow productive and effective communication. Whereas when you start to get an emotion, you are giving them the response that they were looking for, and it doesn't do you any good. And if you do decide that furthering the conversation is what is best, you want to take another deep breath and, reiterate to the person, the microaggressor, that it is not them you are blaming, but rather their comment and how it made you feel. Be open to discussion and explain how that comment has been made to you before, or other actions that have led to you being upset about this comment, and be open to input about that from them and their feelings on it as well. So, you can't just go in and be like, my feelings are the only valid ones. You have to be open to listen to them too. And yes, ways to prevent being a microaggressor now. Biases. You have to be conscious of your own and vigilant of your own biases and fears. So if you see somebody eating a bug next to you, instead of saying, ew, gross, that's disgusting, just understand that, maybe that's part of their culture and their food diet. And, you wouldn't want them to come up and be like making you feel bad for something that you are doing currently. So just being conscious of that and being like, oh, I've never seen somebody eating that before. That's really cool. Like, what is it? Asking questions like you're interested, not so much that you are trying to slight them in any way. Seeking out diverse situations, interacting with people different than yourself, talking about different upbringings, different struggles, definitely gives you more of an idea about people's history and different ways that, you can prevent being rude or having a microaggression towards them. Defense and empathy. Try to not be defensive when someone comes to you saying that something you had said has hurt them in a way, because they are coming to you trying to work out this problem. And have empathy and try to put yourself in their shoes and why maybe they feel the way they do about that comment. And then also doing some of your own personal research on microaggression. There's a lot of stuff online, and it's a great topic to research. Okay. And so how would you guys respond if someone said, "That's so white of you"? And this, I've heard this said to many people. This is, I feel like, very across the race kind of saying. So anyone can feel free to respond to this. Okay, well, that's okay that no one wants to respond. Personally, if someone said, "That's so white of you," I would just ask, "What do you mean by that?" And I would try to explain that by saying that comment, you might, I felt like you were trying to say that white people aren't that great. And it was almost, it came off to me as sarcastic rather than whatever you were trying to say to me. Okay. And then we can go into our conclusion.
So this begins the conclusion of our presentation. So we're going to do a quick recap on what we learned so far. So first we learned what microaggressions are and their small comments or actions to marginalize someone. Next, we learned about the effects that microaggressions have on people. So they make people question themselves and feel excluded. And lastly, we learned how to respond to a microaggressive act. So you explain how the comment or action the perpetrator made you feel. And if you are the perpetrator, have empathy and be open to discussion. And that have empathy on both sides. So we hope that you guys were able to learn a few things from our presentation and are now able to reflect and consider what are ways to be conscious of your own biases. So that concludes our presentation. Feel free to email me at swerep@swetamu.org or Tatiana, first VP at swetamu.org. And feel free to come off mute if you have any questions or drop it in the chat.
Thanks, guys. And you guys can also feel free to talk a little bit more about like microaggressions in your daily lives, or, you know, if you have any questions at all.
Sometimes I feel like it's hard to differentiate if it's actually a microaggression or if it's just like, what if I'm just overthinking? You know, like that's a hard time. Like, was I really trying to be mean, or am I just overthinking about what's going on?
Yes, no, I definitely had that same question going into this presentation. Like, how do and I know this from my personal day, like, am I overreacting? If you at any point feel like you are overreacting or you feel like you're being overly sensitive, that is probably a good point to just like go and talk to the person, because you have a right to feel a certain way about anything that someone has said or done towards you, because that is your own feelings, and you should never feel like you are being overly sensitive or overly dramatic, but definitely don't let it eat away inside you either. You know, maybe be confident enough in yourself that you are who you are and that you have the ability to go and talk to that person and just bring it to their attention. And if they try to gaslight you, which might be a common, or not a common thing, but like might happen, just point that out as well. Be like, see what you're doing right now. I don't appreciate that either. I'm coming to you about something you had said that made me feel uncomfortable, and you are trying to tell me right now it's a joke. And I get that to you, it might have been a joke, but I didn't take it as a joke.
I have a quick question. So it seems to kind of, just in like my opinion, that a lot of these microaggressions are based off of these poor stereotypes of other people, like people of this ethnicity do this, or people of this gender do this. And so kind of as students, you know, as members of the Texas A&M, you know, college engineering, or just as Aggies in general, like, do you have any thoughts on like how we can really kind of eliminate those stereotypes so that way these microaggressions don't even occur?
That is a really hard question, because I would say that like maybe just be more conscious, or have like events that have different diversities, like come and speak, or host things like, oh, come try, well, obviously once COVID gets off, but like have like, oh, an Arab day where like Arabs can bring dishes and like talk to non necessarily Arab cultures, and just be open to discussion about learning about different cultures. Maybe have presentations or lectures. I know that I went to a couple of lectures in Reed Arena that are like outside of school, about like different cultures and different aspects of culture, and just have like try to get more students to attend those. Might have them bring more awareness to like the reality of different cultures and religions and just people.
Kind of, I guess, kind of like a extended question to that, like, is there anything that like we as, you know, as members of organizations, like I'm sure a lot of the participants here are members of all sorts of engineering organizations or leaders in organizations, is there anything that you think we should try to undertake or really do to try to maybe limit these microaggressions in our kind of organizational communities?
Yeah, I would say definitely like team building workshops are really good for that, because a lot of times like you want people, if someone feels like they had a microaggression towards them, they can feel comfortable with going to that person and talking to them. But if they already feel ostracized, they might not want to go and do that. So definitely just like having creating an open forum to prevent microaggressions altogether. I don't know per se, but definitely like doing like maybe culture spotlights, and being sending polls out to your members and being like, is it like anyone wanting to talk about this culture, or like talk about their culture or background, and just like highlighting that at different events where they can take a few minutes and just like some really cool things about my culture that you might not have known. Every year we have a big celebration. It's called New Year's. We drop a huge ball, you know, I don't know, something small, but it like lets them know that they're important and their background and heritage is important, and that it shouldn't be taken for granted.
I also think like having events like Wired and like having these like presentations will like really open it up to the College of Engineering. And maybe if we could like extend or like try to get more of Texas A&M like to attend events like Wired, or like have it more frequent, then that could be a way that we reduce microaggressions here.
This isn't exactly related to that, but I just wanted to say earlier when we were when you had that example for like, that's so white of you, or along those lines earlier, and when you were describing the way that you made it feel, I thought it was really interesting. Like the way you interpreted that microaggression was a lot different than what I personally did, since like you saw it like as a more sarcastic tone. And personally, like I'm a person of color, so I would thought like, oh, are you like trying to imply that my original race is like less than being white, and like being white, like you're intending this to be like a compliment of sorts, whereas it's actually like really backhanded and having the opposite effect. So I think like having discussions like these, you just realize that other people's perspectives can be different from yours, and like for how they're interpreting different things. And like, I think it's good to emphasize that people are different, but at the same time, if you only emphasize the differences, it can like at the same time make people feel ostracized. So if you also like focus, I guess, like on core things that, and like respect and like making sure that everyone feels validated in that sense, that could also go a long way towards what Ben was saying earlier.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I would just, for that, I just feel like marginalizing a group, anytime you marginalize someone, you kind of might ostracize them. It's supposed to be in a demeaning way as well. But I do agree with respect as being like a core value and everything. And you don't always have to like amplify differences, but as definitely seeing people as like individuals and not a specific group only, if that makes sense. So I don't know.
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
like, okay, cool. I was like, I know in the common theme in like current like media is like Karens and Kyles and be like, oh, you're being a Karen, but you really might just have a little issue and now you feel like your issue is no longer important because you're being seen as being too aggressive towards feeling a certain way. I don't know if that makes sense, of how I just explained that made sense.
For that same slide, I also had a friend that told me that I think I was acting white or talking white, and I didn't mention it earlier because I was trying to remember what I said because I was much younger, and I think I was just really confused as to why she said that, and I think it might lead to me making decisions or thinking that I need to be acting in a different way. In my perspective, I thought, why wasn't I seen as my own race and why was it somebody else's? Is there something that I'm doing wrong or differently? Yeah, that was my viewpoint on that side.
Thanks, Roshan. Thanks for sharing about that. It's definitely great to like just see like one comment can be seen seen differently by so many people. And it might not be a microaggression to some versus others, but the important part that is if you do feel like you are being microaggressed, you need to say something and talk to somebody, because if not, it'll cause a lot of self-doubt and exclusion in yourself. And you don't need to do that to yourself. If you have an issue with somebody, you just need to talk to them, for sure.
Okay, if no one has any like other questions or comments, it is past 3, so we will be concluding our meeting now. So thank you everyone for attending. I hope you learned a lot.
Thank you guys so much for participating in WIRED. We were so happy to have you, and this is a fantastic presentation. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having us.